An Unsocial Socialist, one of the great novel of George-Bernad-Shaw, Part 2, Chapter 5. What had passed between Smilash and Henrietta remained unknown except to themselves. Agatha had seen Henrietta clasping his neck in her arms, but had not waited to hear the exclamation of "Sydney, Sydney," which followed, nor to see him press her face to his breast in his anxiety to stifle her voice as he said, "My darling love, don't screech, I implore you. Confound it. We shall have the whole pack here in a moment. Hush. Don't leave me again, Sydney," she entreated, clinging faster to him as his perplexed gaze, wandering toward the entrance to the strawberry, seemed to forsake her. A din of voices in that direction precipitated his irresolution. "We must run away, Hitty," he said. "Hold fast about my neck and don't strangle me. Now then." He lifted her upon his shoulder and ran swiftly through the ground. When they were stopped by the wall, he placed her atop of it, scrambled over, and made her jump into his arms. When he staggered away with her across the fields, gasping out in reply to the inarticulate remonstrance which burst from her as he stumbled and reeled at every hillock. "Your weight is increasing at the rate of a stone a second, my lord. If you stoop, you will break my back. Oh Lord, here is a ditch. Let me down," screamed Henrietta in an ecstasy of delight and apprehension. "You will hurt yourself, and oh, do take." He struggled through a dry ditch as she spoke and came out upon a grassy place that bordered the towpath of the canal. Here on the bank of a hollow, where the moss was dry and soft, he seated her, threw himself prone on his elbows before her and said, panting, "Nessus carrying of degenera was nothing to this. Oh, well, my darling, are you glad to see me? But me, no buts, unless you wish me to vanish again and forever. Wretch that I am, I have longed for you unspeakably more than once since I ran away from you. You didn't care, of course." I did indeed. "Why did you leave me, Sydney?" "Lest a worse thing might befall. Come, don't let us waste in explanations the few minutes we have left. Give me a kiss. Then you are going to leave me again, oh Sydney. Never mind tomorrow, Hitty. We like the sun and the meadows, which are not in the least concerned about the coming winter. Why do you stare at that cursed canal, blindly, dragging its load of filth from place to place until it pitches it into the sea, just as a crowded street pitches its load into the cemetery? Stare at me and give me a kiss." She gave him several and said coaxingly, with her arm still upon his shoulder, "You only talk that. Why to frighten me, Sydney? I know you do. You are the bright sun of my senses," he said, embracing her. "I feel my heart and brain wither in your smile, and I fling them to you for your prey with exultation. How happy I am to have a wife who does not despise me for doing so. Oh, brother, love me the more." "Don't be silly," said Henrietta, smiling vacantly. Then, stung by a half intuition of his meaning, she repulsed him and said angrily, "You despise me. Not more than. I despise myself, indeed not so much, for many emotions that seem base from within seem lovable from without. You intend to leave me again. I feel it, I know it. You think you know it because you feel it. Not a bad reason either. Then you are going to leave me? Do you not feel it and know it? Yes, my cherished Hetty, I assuredly am. She broke into wild exclamations of grief, and he drew her head down and kissed her with a tender action which she could not resist, and a bright face which she did not see. My poor Hitty, you don't understand me. I only understand that you hate me and want to go away from me. That would be easy to understand, but the strangeness is that I love you and want to go away from you, not forever, only for a time. But I don't want you to go away. I don't let you go away, she said, a trace of fierceness mingling with her entreaty. Why do you want to leave me if you love me? How do I know? I can no more tell you the way and wherefores of myself than I can lift myself up by the waistband and carry myself into the next country, as someone challenged a speculator in perpetual motion to do. I am too much pessimist to respect my own affections. Do you know what a pessimist is? A man who thinks everybody as nasty as himself and hates them for it. So, or thereabout, modern English polite society, my native sphere, seems to me as corrupt as consciousness of culture and absence of honesty can make it. A canting, lie-loving, fact-hating, scribbling, chattering, wealth hunting, pleasure hunting, celebrity hunting mob that, having lost the fear of hell and not replaced it by the love of justice, cares for nothing but the lion's share of the wealth wrung by threat of starvation from the hands of the classes that create it. If you interrupt me with a silly speech, Hetty, I will pitch you into the canal and die of sorrow for my lost love afterwards. You know what I am, according to the conventional description, a gentleman with lots of money. Do you know the wicked origin of that money and gentility? Oh, Sydney, have you been doing anything? No, my best beloved, I am a gentleman and have been doing nothing that a man can do so, and no, starve is nowadays not even a paradox. Every halfpenny I possess is stolen money, but it was being stolen legally. And what is of practical importance to you? I have no means of restoring it to the rightful owners, even if I felt inclined to. Do you know what my father was? What difference can that make now? Don't be disagreeable and full of ridiculous fads. Sydney, dear, I didn't marry your father. No, but you married, only incidentally, of course, my father's fortune. That necklace of yours was purchased with his money, and I can almost fancy stains of blood. Stop, Sydney. I don't like this sort of romancing. It is all nonsense. Do be nice to me. There are stains of sweat on it, I know. You nasty wretch. I am thinking not of you, my dainty one, but of the unfortunate people who slave that we may live idly. Let me explain to you why we are so rich My father was a shrewd, energetic and ambitious Manchester man who understood an exchange of any sort as a transaction by which one man should lose and the other gain. He made it his object to make as many exchanges as possible and to always be gaining party in them. I do not know exactly what he was, for he was ashamed both of his antecedents and of his relatives, from which I can only infer that they were honest and therefore unsuccessful people. However, he acquired some knowledge of the cotton trade, saved some money, borrowed some more on the security of his reputation for getting the better of other people in business, and, as he accurately told me afterwards, started for himself. He bought a factory and some raw cotton. Now you must know that a man, by laboring some time on a piece of raw cotton, can turn it into a piece of manufactured cotton fit for making into sheets and shifters and the like. The manufactured cotton is more valuable than the raw cotton because the manufacture costs wear and tear of machinery, wears and tears of the factory, rent of the ground upon which the factory is built, and human labor or wear and tear of live man, which has to be made good by food, shelter, and rest. Do you understand that? We used to learn all about it at college. I don't see what it has to do with us, since you are not in the cotton trade. You learned as much as it was thought safe to teach you, no doubt, but not quite all. I should think when my father started for himself, there were many men in Manchester who were willing to labor in this way, but they had no factory to work in, no machinery to work with, and no raw cotton to work on, simply because all this indispensable plant and the materials for producing a fresh supply of it had been appropriated to earlier comers. So they found themselves with a gasping stomach, shivering limbs, and hungry wives and children in a place called their own country, in which, nevertheless, every scrap of ground and possible source of subsistence was tightly locked up in the hands of others and guarded by armed soldiers and policemen. In this helpless condition, the poor devils were ready to beg for access to a factory and roam cotton on any condition compatible with life. My father offered them the use of his factory, his machines, and his raw cotton on the following conditions. They were to work long and hard, early and late, and add a fresh value to his raw cotton by manufacturing it out of the value thus creating by them. They were to recoup him for what he supplied them with: rent, shelter, gas, water, machinery, raw cotton, everything, and to pay him for his own service as superintendent, manager, and salesman. So far he asked nothing but just remuneration. But after this had been paid, a balance due solely to their own labor remained. Out of this, said my father, you shall keep just enough to save you from starving, and of the rest you shall make me a present to reward me for my virtue in saving money. Such is the bargain I propose. It is, in my opinion, fair and calculated to encourage thrifty habits. If it does not strike you in that light, you can get a factory and a raw cotton for yourself. You shall not use mine. In other words, they might go to the devil and starve. Hobson's choice. for all the other factories were owned by men who offered no better terms. The Manchesterians could not bear to starve or to see their children starve, and so they accepted his terms and went into the factory. The terms, you see, did not admit of their beginning to save for themselves, as he had done. Well, they created great wealth by their labor and lived on very little, so that the balance they gave for nothing to my father was large. He bought more cotton and more machinery and more factories with it, employed more men to make wealth for him, and so his fortune increased like a rolling snowball. He prospered enormously, but the workmen were no better off than that first, and they dared not rebel and demand more of the money they had made, for there were always plenty of starving wretches outside willing to take their place on the old terms. Sometimes he met with a check, as for instance. Then, in his eagerness to increase his store, he made the men manufacture more cotton than the public needed, or when he could not get enough of raw cotton, as happened during the Civil War in America, then he adapted himself to circumstances by turning away as many workmen as he could not find customers or cotton for, and they, of course, starved or subsisted on charity. During the wartime, a big subscription was got up for this poor wrecked, and my father subscribed 100 pounds, in spite, he said, of his own great losses. Then he bought new machines, and as women and children could work these as well as men, and were cheaper and more docile, he turned away about 70 out of every 100 of his hands, and replaced them by their wives and children, who made money for him faster than ever. By this time he had long ago given by managing the factories, and paid clever fellows who had no money of their own, a few hundred a year, to do it for him. He also purchased shares in other concerns conducted on the same principle, pocketed dividends made in countries which he had never visited by men whom he had never seen, brought a seat in Parliament from a poor and corrupt constituency, and helped to preserve the laws by which he had triumphed. Afterward, when his wealth grew famous, he had less need to bribe, for modern men worship the rich as gods, and will elect a man as one of their rulers of no other reason than that he is a millionaire. He sped gentility, lived in a palace at Kensington, and bought a part of Scotland to make a deer forest of. It is easy enough to make a deer forest, as trees are not necessary there. You simply drive off the peasants, destroy these houses, and make a desert of the land. However, my father did not shoot much himself. He generally let the forest out by the season to those who did. He purchased a wife of gentle blood too, with the unsatisfactory result now before you. That is how Jesse refuses, a poor Manchester bagman, contrived to become a plutocrat and gentleman of landed estate, and also how I, who never did a stroke of work in my life, am overburdened with wealth, whilst the children of the man who made that wealth are slaving as their fathers slaved, or starving, or in the workhouse, or on the streets, or the Deus knows where. What do you think of that, my love? What is the use of worrying about it, Sydney? It cannot be helped now. Besides, if your father saved money and the others were improvident, he deserved to make a fortune. Granted, but he didn't make a fortune. He took a fortune that others made. At Cambridge, they taught me that his profits were the reward of abstinences, the abstinence which enabled him to save. That quieted my conscience until I began to wonder why one man should make another pay him for exercising one of the virtues. Then came the question, what did my father obtain from the workmen? Abstained from meat, drink, fresh air, good clothes, decent lodging, holidays, money, the society of their families, and pretty nearly everything that make life worth living, which was perhaps the reason why they usually died 20 years or so sooner than people in our circumstances. Yet no one rewarded them their abstinence. The reward came to my father, who abstained from none of these things, but indulged in them all to his heart's content. Besides, if the money was the reward of abstinence, it seemed logical to infer that he must abstain 10 times as much when he had 50,000 a year as then he had only 5,000. Here was a problem, for my young mind required something from which my father abstained and in which his workmen exceeded, and which the abstained from more and more as he grew richer and richer. The only thing that answered this description was hard work, and as I never met a sane man willing to pay another for idling, I began to see that these prodigious payments to my father were extorted by force. To do him justice, he never boasted of abstinence. He considered himself a hard-worked man and claimed his fortune as the reward of his risks, his calculations, his anxieties, and the journeys he had to make all seasons and at all hours. This comforted me somewhat until it occurred to me that if he had lived a century earlier, invested his money in a horse and a pair of pistols, and taken to the road his object, that of wresting from others the fruits of their labor without rendering them an equivalent, would have been exactly the same, and his risk far greater, for it would have included risk of the gallows, constant travelling with the constable at his heels, and calculations of the chances of robbing the Dover mail, would have given him his fill of activity and anxiety. On the whole, if Jesse refuses MP, who died a millionaire in his palace at Kensington, had been a highwayman, I could not more heartily loathe the social arrangement that rendered such a career as his not only possible but eminently creditable to himself in the eyes of his fellows. Most men make it their business to imitate him, hoping to become rich and idle on the same terms. Therefore, I turn my back on them, I cannot sit at their feasts knowing how much they cost in human misery, and seeing how little they produce of human happiness. What is your opinion, my treasure? Henrietta seemed a little troubled. She smiled faintly and said carelessly, "It was not your fault, Sydney. I didn't blame you." "Immortal powers!" he exclaimed, sitting bolt upright and appealing to the skies. "Here is a woman who believes that the only concern all this causes me is whether she thinks any the worse of me personally on account of it. No, no, Sydney, it is not I alone. Nobody thinks the worse of you for it." "Quite so," he returned in a polite frenzy. "Nobody sees any harm in it. That is precisely the mischief of it. Besides," she urged, "your mother belonged to one of the oldest families in England, and what more can men desire than wealth with descent from a county family? Could a man be happier than I ought to be, sprung as I am from monopolies of all the sources and instruments of the production, of land on the one side and of machinery on the other? This very ground on which we are resting was the property of my mother's father. At least the law allowed him to use it as such. When he was a boy, there was a fairly prosperous race of peasants settled here, tilling the soil, paying him rent for permission to do so, and making enough out of it to satisfy his large wants and their own narrow needs without working themselves to death. But my grandfather was a shrewd man. He perceived that cows and sheep produce more money by their meat and wool than peasant by their husbandry. So he cleared the estate. That is, he drove the peasants from their homes, as my father did afterwards in his Scotch deer forest, or as his tombstone has it, he developed the resources of his country. He don't know what became of the peasant. He didn't know, and I presume didn't care. I suppose the old ones went into the workhouse, and the young ones crowded the towns and worked for men like my father in factories. Their places were taken by cattle, which paid for their food so well that my grandfather, getting my father to take share in the enterprise, hired laborers on the Manchester terms to cut that canal for him. When it was made, he took toll upon it, and his heirs still take toll, and the son of the navvies who dug it and of the engineers who designed it pay the toll when they have occasion to travel by it, or to purchase goods which have been conveyed along it. I remember my grandfather well. He was a well-bred man and a perfect gentleman in his manners, but on the whole I think he was wickeder than my father, who after all was caught in the wheels of a vicious system, and had either to spoil others or he spoiled by them. But my grandfather, the old rascal, who in no such dilemma, master as he was of his bit of merry England, no man could have enslaved him, and he might at least have lived and let live. My father followed his example in the matter of the deer forest, but that was the climax of his wickedness, whereas it was only the beginning of my grandfather's. Howbeit, whichever pierced the palm, there they were, the type after which we all strive. Not all, Sydney, not we too. I hate tradespeople and country squires We belong to the artistic and cultured classes, and we can keep aloof from shopkeepers living, meanwhile, at the rate of several thousand a year on rent and interest. No, my dear, this is the way of those people who insist that when they are in heaven they shall be spared the recollection of such a place as hell, but are quite content that it shall exist outside their consciousness. I respect my father more. I despite him less for doing his own sweeting and filching than I do the sensitive sluggards and cowards who let him their money to sweet and filch with, and asked no questions provided the interest was paid punctually. And asked your friends, the artists, they are the worst of all. Oh Sydney, you are determined not to be pleased. Artists not keep factories. No, but the factory is only a part of the machinery of the system. Its basis is the tyranny of brain force, which among civilized man is allowed to do what muscular force does among schoolboys and savages. The schoolboy proposition is, I am stronger than you, therefore you shall fag for me. It is grown up form is, I am cleverer than you, therefore you shall fag for me. The state of things we produce by submitting to this, bad enough even at first, become intolerable when the mediocre or foolish descendants of the clever fellows claim to have inherited their privileges. Now no men are greater ticklers for the arbitrary domination of genius and talent than your artists. The great painter is not satisfied with being sought after and admired because his hands can do more than ordinary hands, which they truly can, but he wants to be fed as if his stomach needed more food than ordinary stomachs, which it does not. A day's work is a day's work, neither more nor less, and the man who does it need a day's sustenance, a night's repose, and due leisure, whether he be painter or plowman. But the rascal of a painter, poet, novel, or other voluntary in labor is not content with his advantage in popular esteem over the plowman. He also wants an advantage in money, as if there were more hours in a day spent in the studio or library than in the field, or as if he needed more food to enable him to do his work than the plowman to enable him to do his. He talks of the higher quality of his work as if the higher quality of it were of his own making, as if it gave him a right to work less for his neighbors than his neighbor worked for him, as if the plowman could not do better without him than he without the plowman, as if the value of the most celebrated pictures has not been questioned more than that of any straight furrow in the arable world, as if it did not take an apprenticeship of as many years to train the hand and eye of a mason or blacksmith as of an artist, as if, in short, the fellow were a god, as canting brain worshippers have for years past been assuring him he is. Artists are the high priestess of the modern Malach. None out of 10 of them are diseased creatures, just sane enough to trade on their own neurosis. The only quality theirs which extorts my respect is a certain sublime selfishness which makes them willing to starve and to let their family starve sooner than do any work they don't like. Indeed, you are quite wrong, Sydney. There was a girl at the Slade School who supported her mother and two sisters by her drawing. Besides, what can you do? People were made so. Yes, I was made a landlord and a capitalist by the folly of the people, but they can unmake me if they will. Meanwhile, I have absolutely no means of escape from my position except by giving away my slaves by fellows who will use them no better than I, and becoming a slave myself, which, if you please, you shall not catch me doing in a hurry. No, my beloved, I must keep my foot on their necks for your sake as well as for my own. But you do not care about all this rosy stuff. I am consumed with remorse for having bored my darling. You want to know why I am living here like a hermit in a vulgar two-roomed hovel instead of tasting the delights of London society with my beautiful and devoted young wife. But you don't intend to stay here, Sydney. Yes, I do, and I will tell you why. I am helping to liberate those Manchester labourers who were my father's slaves. To bring that about, their fellow slaves all over the world must unite in a vast international association of men pledged to share the world's work justly, to share the produce of the work justly, to yield not a farthing charity apart to any full-grown and able-bodied idler or maligners, and the treat as vermin in the Commonwealth persons attempting to get more than their share of wealth or give less than their shares of work. This is a very difficult thing to accomplish because working men, like the people called their betters, do not always understand their own interests and will often actually help their oppressors to exterminate their saviors to the tune of Rule Britannica or some such lying doggerel. We must educate them out of that and meanwhile push forward the International Association of Labourers diligently. I am at present occupied in propagating its principles. Capitalism organized for repressive purposes under pretext of governing the nation would very soon stop the association if it understands our aim. But it thinks that we are engaged in gunpowder plot and conspiracies to assassinate crowded heads, and so, whilst the police are blundering in search of evidence of these, or real work goes on unmolested. Whether I am really advancing the cause is more than I can say. I use heaps of postage stamps, pay the expense of many different lectures, defray the cost of printing reams of pamphlets and handbills, which hail the labourer flutteringly as the salt of the earth. Write and edit a little socialist journal and do what lies in my power generally. I had rather spend my ill-gotten wealth in this way than upon a expensive house and retinue of servants, and I prefer my corduroy and two-roomed chalet here to our pretty little house, and your pretty little ways and my pretty little neglect of the work that my heart is set upon Someday, perhaps, I will take a holiday, and then we will have a new honeymoon." For a moment Henrietta seemed about to cry. Suddenly she exclaimed with enthusiasm, "I will stay with you, Sydney. I will share your work, whatever it may be. I will dress as a dairymaid and have a little pail to carry milk in. The world is nothing to me except when you are with me, and I should love to live here and sketch from nature." He blanched and partially rose, unable to conceal his dismay. She resolved not to be cast off, seized him and clung to him. This was the moment that excited the derision of Wickens' boy in the adjacent gravel pit. Trefusis was glad of the interruption, and when he gave the boy 2 pence and bade him begone, half hoped that he would insist on remaining. But though an obdurate boy on most occasions, he proved complaisant on this, and withdrew to the high road, where he made over one of his pennies to phantom gambler, and tossed with him until recalled from his dual state by the appearance of Fairham's party. In the meantime, Henrietta urgently returned to her proposition. "We should be so happy," she said. "I would housekeep for you, and you could work as much as you pleased. Our life would be a long idyll." "My love," he said, shaking his head as she looked beseechingly at him, "I have too much Manchester cotton in my constitution for long idylls. And the truth is that the first condition of work with me is your absence. When you are with me, I can do nothing but make love to you. You bewitch me. When I escape from you for a moment, it is only to go on remorsefully over the hours you have tempted me to waste and energy you have utilized. If you won't live with me, you had no right to marry me. True, but that is neither your fault nor mine. We have found that we love each other too much, that our intercourse hinders our usefulness, and so we must part, not forever, my dear, only until you have cares and business of your own to fill up your life and prevent you from wasting mine." "I believe you are mad," she said petulantly. "The world is mad nowadays and is galloping to the doors as fast as greed can goad it. I merely stand out of the rush, not liking its destination. Here comes a barge, the commander of which is devoted to me because he believes that I am organizing a revolution for the abolition of locked dues to tolls. We will go abroad and float down to Levern, whence you can return to London. You had better telegraph from the junction to the college. There must be a huge and cry out after us by this time. You shall have my address, and we can write to one another or see one another whenever we please. Or you can divorce me for deserting you. You would like me to, I know," said Henrietta, sobbing. "I should die of despair, my darling," he said complacently. "Sheep, stop crying, Hetty, for God's sake. You lacerate my very soul." "Oi, master," roared the bargee. "Good afternoon, sir," said a man with a short whip in his hand. trudged beside the white horse that told the birch. "Come up," he added malevolently to the horse. "I want to get on board and go up to Levern with you," said Rufus. "He seems a well-fed brute, that." "Better fed nor me," said the man. "You can't get the work out of 100 horse that you can out of a underfed man or woman. I have been in parts of England where women pulled the barges. They come cheaper nor because it didn't cost nothing to get new one when the old ones we wore out." "Then why not employ them?" said Rufus with ironical gravity. "The principle of buying labor force in the cheapest market and selling its product in the dearest has done much to make Englishmen what they are. The railway companies keeps for the like of I am," said the man with a cunning laugh, indicating the horse by smacking him on the belly with the butt of his whip. "If ever you try begin a labor in a earnest, Governor, try it on 4 legs. You will find it far preferable to try on 2. This man is one of my converts," said Rufus apart to Henrietta. "He told me the other day that since I sat him, thinking he never sees a gentleman without feeling inclined to heave a brick at him. I find that Socialism is often misunderstood by its least intelligent supporters and opponents to mean simply unrestrained indulgence of our natural propensity to heave bricks at a respectable person. Now I am going to carry you along this plank. If you keep quiet, we may reach the verge. If not, we shall reach the bottom of the canal." He carried her safely over and exchanged some friendly words with the bargee. Then he took Henrietta forward and stood watching the water as they were borne along noiselessly between the hilly pastures of the country. "This would be a fairy journey," he said, "if one could forget the woman down below, cooking her husband's dinner in a stifling hole about as big as your wardrobe and—" "Oh, don't talk any more of these things," she said crossly. "I cannot help them. I have my own troubles to think of. Her husband lives with her. She will change place with you, my dear, if you make her the offer." She had no answer ready. After a pause, he began to speak poetically of the scenery and to offer her lover-like speeches and compliments. But she felt that he intended to get rid of her, and he knew that it was useless to try to hide that design from her. She turned away and sat down on a pile of bricks, only breathing angrily when he pressed her for a word. As they neared the end of her voyage, and her intense protest against desertion remained, as she thought, only half expressed, her sense of injury grew almost unbearable. They landed on a wharf and went through an unswept, deeply rutted lane up to the main street of Levern. Here he became Smilash again, walking deferentially a little before her, as if she had hired him to point out the way. She then saw that her last opportunity of appealing to him had gone by, and she nearly burst into tears at the thought. It occurred to her that she might prevail upon him by making a scene in public. But the street was a busy one, and she was a little afraid of him. Neither consideration would have checked her in one of her ungovernable moods, but now she was in an abject one. Her moods seemed to come only when they were harmful to her. She suffered herself to be put into the railway omnibus, which was on the point of starting from the inn-yard when they arrived there, and though he touched his hat, asked whether she had any message to give him, and in a tender whisper wished her a safe journey. She would not look at or speak to him, so they parted, and he returned alone to the chalet, where he was received by the two policemen who subsequently brought him to the college. Chapter 6. The year wore on, and the long winter evening set in. The studious young ladies at Alton College, elbows on desk and hands over ears, shuttered chillily in fur, tempest, whilst they loaded their memories with the statement of writers on moral science, or like men who swim upon corks, reasoned out mathematical problems upon postulates. Whence it sometimes happened that the more reasonable a student was in mathematics, the more unreasonable she was in the affairs of real life, concerning which few trustworthy postulates have yet been ascertained. Agatha, not studious and apt to shiver in winter, began to break rule number 17 with increasing frequency. Rule number 17 forbade the student to enter the kitchen or in any way to disturb the servants in the discharge of their duties. Agatha broke it because she was fond of making toffee, of eating it, of a good fire, of doing any forbidden thing, and of the admiration with which the servants listened to her ventriloquial and musical feats. Gertrude accompanied her because she too liked toffee, and because she plumed herself on her condescension to her inferiors. Jane went because her two friends went, and the spirit of adventure, the force of example, and the love of toffee often brought more volunteers to these expeditions than Agatha thought it safe to enlist. One evening, Miss Wilson, going downstairs alone to her private wine cellar, was arrested near the kitchen by sounds of revelry, and stopping to listen, overheard the castanet dance. The bee on the window pane, Robin Adair, and an imitation of herself in the act of appealing to Jane Carpenter's better nature to induce her to study for the Cambridge local. She waited until the cold and her fear of being discovered. Spying forced her to creep upstairs, ashamed of having enjoyed a silly entertainment, and of conniving at the breach of the rules rather than face a fresh quarrel with Agatha. There was one particular in which matters between Agatha and the college discipline did not go on exactly as before. Although she had formerly supplied a disproportionately large number, the confection in the fault book, the entry which had nearly led to her expulsion, was the last she ever made it. Not that her conduct was better, it was rather the reverse. Miss Wilson never mentioned the matter, the fault book being scared from all allusion on her part, but she saw that, though Agatha would not confess her own sins, She still assisted others to unburden their consciences. The witticism with which Jane unsuspectingly enlivened the pages of the recording angel were conclusive on this point. Smilash had now adopted a profession. In the last day of autumn, he had whitewashed the chalet, painted the doors, windows and veranda, repaired the roof and interior, and improved the place so much that the landlord had warned him that the rent would be raised at the expiration of his 12 months' tenancy, remarking that a tenant could not reasonably expect to have a pretty, rain-tight dwelling house for the same money as a hardly habitable ruin. Smilash had immediately promised to dilapidate to its former state at the end of the year. He had put up a board at the gate with an inscription copied from some printed cards, which he presented to persons who happened to converse him. Jefferson Smilash, painter, decorator, glacier, plumber and gardener. Piano fortes tuned. Domestic engineering in all its branches. Families waited upon at table or otherwise. Camo Unix Villa, Levern, NB, advice gratis. Number reasonable, offer refused. The business thus announced, comprehensive as it was, did not flourish. When asked by the curious for testimony to his competence and respectability, he recklessly referred them to Fairholme, to Joseph, and in particular to Miss Wilson, who, he said, had known him from his earliest childhood. Fairholme, glad of an opportunity to show that he was no merely mouthed person, declared, when applied to, that Smilash was the greatest rogue in the country. Joseph, partly from the benevolence and partly from the vague fear that Smilash might at any moment take an action against him for defamation of character, said he had no doubt that he was a very cheap workman and that it would be a charity to give him some little job to encourage him. Miss Wilson confirmed Fairholme's account, and the church organist, who had tuned all the piano fortes in the neighborhood once a year for nearly a quarter of the century, denounced the newcomer as jack of all trade and master of none. Hereupon the radicals of Levern, a small and disreputable party, began to assert that there was no harm in the man and that the persons and Miss Wilson, who lived in a fine house and did nothing but take in the daughters of rich swells as boarders, might employ their leisure better than in taking the bread out of a poor workman's mouth. But as none of this faction needed the services of a domestic engineer, he was none the richer for their support, and the only patron he obtained was a housemaid who was leaving her situation at a country house in the vicinity and wanted her box repaired. The lid having fallen off, Smilash demanded half a crown for the job, but on her demurring, immediately apologized and came down to a shilling. For this sum he repainted the box, traced her initial on it, and affixed new hinges, a Brahma lock, and brass handles at a cost to himself to 10 shillings and several hours' labor. The housemaid found fault with the color of the paint, made him take off the handles, which she said reminded her of a coffin, complained that a lock with such a small key couldn't be strong enough for a large box, but admitted that it was all her own fault for not employing a proper man. It got about that he had made a poor job of the box, and as he, when taxed with his, emphatically confirmed it, he got no other commission, and his signboard served thenceforth only for the amusement of pedestrian tourists and of shepherd boys with a taste for stone throwing. One night, a great storm blew over Levern, and those young ladies at Alton College who were afraid of lightning said their prayers with some earnestness. At 12:30, the rain, wind, and thunder made such a din that Agatha and Gertrude wrapped themselves in shawls, stole downstairs to the window on the landing outside Miss Wilson's study, and stood watching the flashes give vivid glimpses of the landscape, and discussing in whispers whether it was dangerous to stand near a window, and whether brass stair rods could attract lightning. Agatha, as serious and friendly with a single companion as she was mischievous and satirical before a large audience, enjoyed the scene quietly. The lightning did not terrify her, for she knew little of the value of life, and fancied much concerning the heroism of being indifferent to it. The tremors which the more startling flashes caused her only made her more conscious of her own courage and its contrast with the uneasiness of Gertrude, who, at least shrinking from a forked sing-song of blue flame, said, "Let us go back to bed, Agatha. I feel sure that we are not safe here." "Quite as safe as in bed, where we cannot see anything. How the house shakes! I believe the rain will better in the windows before." "Hush," whispered Gertrude, catching her arm in terror. "What was that?" "What?" "I am sure I heard the bell." "The gate bell. Oh, do let us go back to bed." "Nonsense. Who would be out on such a night as this? Perhaps the wind rang it." They waited for a few moments, Gertrude trembling and Agatha feeling, as she listened in the darkness, a sensation familiar to persons who are afraid of ghosts. Presently a veiled clangor mingled with the wind. A few sharp and urgent snatches of it came unmistakably from the bell at the gate of the college ground. It was a loud bell, used to summon a servant for the college to open the gate, for though there was Porter's Lodge, it was uninhabited. "Who on earth can it be?" said Agatha. "Can't they find the wicked, the idiots?" "Oh, I hope not. Do come upstairs, Agatha." "No, I won't. Go you, if you like." But Gertrude was afraid to go alone. "I think I had better waken Miss Wilson and tell her," continued Agatha. "It seemed awful to shut anybody out on such a night as this. But we don't know who it is." "Well, I suppose you are not afraid of them in any case," said Agatha, knowing the contrary, but recognizing the convenience of shaming Gertrude into silence. They listened again. The storm was now very boisterous, and they could not hear the bell. Suddenly there was a loud knocking at the house door. Gertrude screamed, and her cry was echoed from the rooms above, where several girls had heard the knocking also and had been driven by it into the state of mind which accompanies the climax of nightmare. Then a candle flickered on the stairs, and Miss Wilson's voice, reassuringly firm, was heard. "Who is that?" "It is I, Miss Wilson, and Gertrude. We have been watching the storm, and there is someone knocking at the tremendous battery with the knocker, followed by a sound, confused by the gale, as of a man shouting," interrupted her. "They had better not open the door," said Miss Wilson, in some alarm. "You are very imprudent, Agatha, to stand here. You will catch your death off, dear me." "What can be the matter?" She hurried down, followed by Agatha, Gertrude, and some of the braver students, to the hall, where they found a few shivering servants watching the housekeeper, who was at the keyhole of the house door, querulously asking who was there. She was evidently not heard by those without, for the knocking recommenced whilst she was speaking, and she recoiled as if she had received a blow on the mouth. Miss Wilson then rattled the chain to attract attention and demanded again who was there. "Let us in," was returned in a hollow shout through the keyhole. "There is a dying woman and 3 children here. Open the door." Miss Wilson lost her presence of mind to gain time. She replied, I can't hear you." "What do you say?" "Damnation," said the voice, speaking this time to some one outside. "They can't hear." And the knocking recommenced with increased urgency. Agatha, excited, caught Miss Wilson's dressing gown and repeated to her what the voice had said. Miss Wilson had heard distinctly enough, and she felt, without knowing clearly why, that the door must be opened. But she was almost overmastered by a vague dread of what was to follow. She began to undo the chain, and Agatha helped with the bolts. 2 of the servants exclaimed that they were all about to be murdered in their beds, and ran away. A few of the students seemed inclined to follow their example. At last the door loosed, was blown wide open, flinging Miss Wilson and Agatha back, and admitting a whirlwind that tore around the hall, snatched at the woman's draperies, and blew out the lights. Agatha, by a hash of lightning, saw for an instant 2 men straining at the door like sailors at the capstan. Then she knew by the cessation of the whirlwind that they had shut it. Matches were struck, the candles relighted, and the newcomers clearly perceived Smilash, bareheaded, without a coat, his corduroy vest and trousers heavy with rain, a rough-looking, middle-aged man, poorly dressed like a shepherd, wet as Smilash, with the expression piteous, patient, and desperate of one hard driven by ill fortune, and at the end of his resources. 2 little children, a boy and a girl, almost naked, covering under an old sack that had served them as an umbrella, and lying on the settee where the 2 men had laid it, a heap of wrecked wearing apparel, snacking and rotten matting, with Smilash coat and sou'wester, the wall covering, a bundle which presently proved to be an exhausted woman with a tiny infant at her breast. Smilash's expression as he looked at her was ferocious. "Sorry for to trouble you, lady," said the man, after gazing anxiously at Smilash, as if he had expected him to act as spokesman. "But my roof and the side of my house was gone in the storm, and my missus has been having another little one, and I am sorry to ill convenience you, miss. But inconvenience, exclaimed Smilash. It is a lady's privilege to relieve you, her highest privilege. The little boy here began to cry for mere misery, and the woman roused herself to say, "For shame, Tom," before the lady, and then collapsed, too weak to care for what might happen next in the world. Smilash looked impatiently at Miss Wilson, who hesitated, and said to him, "What do you expect me to do?" "To help us," he replied. Then with an explosion of nervous energy, he added, "Do what your hurt tells you to do. Give your bed and your clothes to the woman, and let your girls pitch their books to the devil for a few days, and make something for these poor little creatures to wear. The poor have worked hard enough to clothe them. Let them take their turn now and clothe the poor." "No, no. Steady, master," said the man, stepping forward to propitiate Miss Wilson, and evidently much oppressed by a sense of unwelcomeness. "It ain't any fault of the ladies. Might I make so bold as to ask you to put this woman of mine anywhere that may be convenient until morning? Any sort of a place will do. She is accustomed to rough it, just to have a roof over her until I find a room in the village where we can shake down." Here, led by his own words to contemplate the future, he looked desolately round the cornice of the hall, as if it were a shelf on which somebody might have left a suitable lodging for him. Miss Wilson turned her back decisively and contemptuously on Smilash. She had recovered herself. "I will keep your wife here," she said to the man. "Every care shall be taken for her. The children can stay too." "Three cheers for moral science," cried Smilash ecstatically, breaking into the outrageous dialect he had forgotten in his wrath. "What was my words to you, neighbor, when I said we should bring your missus to the college, and you said, ironical like, 'Aye, and blooming glad they will be see us there'? Did I not say to you that the lady had a noble art, and would show it when put to the test by such calamity as this? Why should you bring my hasty words up again me now, master, when the lady has been so kind?" said the man with emotion. "I am humbly grateful to you, miss, and so is Bess. We were sensible of the inconvenience we—" Miss Wilson, who had been conferring with the housekeeper, cut his speech short by ordering him to carry his wife to bed, which he did with the assistance of Smilash, now jubilant, whilst they were away on the servants, bidden to bring some blanket to the woman's room, refused, saying that she was not going to wait on that sort of people. Miss Wilson gave her warning almost fiercely to quit the college next day. This accepted, no ill will was shown to the refugees. The young ladies were then requested to return to bed. Meanwhile, the man, having laid his wife in a chamber palatial in comparison with that which the storm had blown about her ears, was congratulating her on her luck and threatening the children with the most violent chastisement if they failed to behave themselves with strict property whilst they remained in that house. Before leaving them, he kissed his wife, and she, reviving, asked him to look at the baby. He did so, and pensively apostrophized it with a shocking epithet in anticipation of the time when its appetite must be satisfied from the provision shop instead of from its mother's breast. She laughed and cried shame on him, and so they parted cheerfully. When they returned to the hall with Smilash, they found 2 mugs of beer waiting for them. The girls had retired, and only Miss Wilson and the housekeeper remained. "Here is your health, ma'am," said the man, before drinking, "and may you find such another as yourself to help you when you are in trouble, which Lord send may never come." "Is your house quite destroyed?" said Miss Wilson. "Where will you spend the night? Don't you think of me, ma'am. Master Smilash here will kindly put me up till morning." "His health," said Smilash, touching the mug with his lips. "The roof and south wall is burned right away," continued the man, after pausing for the moment to puzzle over Smilash's meaning. "I doubt if there is a storm of it standing by this. But Sir John will build it for you again. You are one of his herds, are you not?" "I am, miss, but not he. He will be glad it is down. He don't like people living in the land. I have told him time and again that the place was ready to fall. But he said I couldn't expect him to lay out money on a house that he got no rent for. You see, miss, I didn't pay any rent. I took low wages, and the bit of a hut was a sort of set off again what I was paid short of the other men. I couldn't afford to have it repaired, though I did what I could to patch and drop it. And now most like I shall be blamed for letting it to be blown down, and shall have no to live in half a room in the town and pay 2 or 3 shillings a week, besides walking 3 miles to and from my work every day. A gentleman like Sir John don't hardly know what the value of a penny is to us labouring folk, nor how cruel hard his estate rules and the like comes on us." "Sir John's health," said Smilash, touching the mug as before. The man drank a mouthful humbly, and Smilash continued, "Here is to be glorious landed gentry of old England. Bless him." "Master Smilash is only joking," said the man apologetically. "It is his way. You should not bring a family into the world if you are so poor," said Miss Wilson severely. "Can you not see that you impoverish yourself by doing so? To put the matter on no higher grounds, Reverend Mr. Malthew's health," remarked Smilash, repeating his pantomime. "Some say it is the children, and some say it is the drink, miss," said the man submissively. "But from what I see, family or no family, drunk or sober, the poor gets poorer and rich richer every day. Ain't it distinguished to hear a man so ignorant of the improvement in the condition of his class?" said Smilash, appealing to Miss Wilson. "If you intend to take this man home with you," said, turning sharply on him, "you had better do it at once. I take it kind on your part that you ask me to do anything after you up and telling Mr. Wickens that I am the last person in Levern you would trust with a job. So you are the very last. Why don't you drink your beer? Not in scorn of your drawing, lady, but because, being a common man, water is good enough for me. I wish you good night, miss, said the man, and thank you kindly for Bess and the children. Good night, she replied, stepping aside to avoid any salutation from Smilash. But he went up to her and said in a low voice and with a refuse's manner and assent, good night, Miss Wilson. If you should ever be in want of the service of a dog, a man, or a domestic engineer, remind Smilash of Bess and the children, and he will act for you in any of those capacities. They opened the door cautiously and found that the wind, conquered by the rain, had abated. Miss Wilson's candle, though it flickered in the draught, was not extinguished this time, and she was presently left with the housekeeper, bolting and chaining the door, and listening to the crunching of feet on the gravel outside, laying away through the steady patterning of the rain. Chapter 7. Agatha was at this time in her 17th year. She had a lively perception of the foibles of others, and no reverence for her seniors, whom she thought dull, cautious, and ridiculously amenable by commonplaces. But she was subject to the illusion which disables youth in spite of its superiority to age. She thought herself an exception, crediting Mr. Jansenus and the general mob of the mankind with nothing but a groveling consciousness of some few material facts. She felt in herself an exquisite sense and all-embracing conception of nature, shared only by her favorite poet and heroes of romance and history. Hence she was in the common youthful case of being much better judge of other people's affairs than of her own. As the fellow student who adored some Henry or Augustus, not from the drivelling sentimentality which the world called love, but because this particular Henry or Augustus was a phoenix to whom the laws that governed the relation of orderly lads and lasses did not apply. Agatha laughed in her sleeve. The more she saw of this weakness in her fellows, the more satisfied she was that being forewarned, she was also forearmed against an attack of it on herself, much as if a doctor were to conclude that he could not catch smallpox because he had been seen many cases of it, or as if a master mariner, knowing that many ships are wrecked in the British Canal, should venture where without a pilot, thinking that he knew its perils too well to run away any risk of them. Yet, as the doctor might hold such an opinion, if he believed himself to be constituted differently from ordinary men, or the shipmaster adopt such a course under the impression that his vessel was a star, Agatha found false security in the subjective difference between her fellows seen from without and herself knowing from within. When, for instance, she fell in love with Mr. Jefferson Smilash, a step upon which she resolved a day after the storm, her imagination invested the pleasing emotion with the scaredness which to her set it far apart and distinct from the frivolous fancies of which Henry and Augustus had been the subject, and she the confidant. I can look at him quite coolly and dispassionately, she said to herself, though his face has a strange influence that must, I know, correspond to some unexplained power within me. Yet it is not a perfect face. I have seen many men who are, strictly speaking, far handsomer, if the light that never was on sea or land is in his eyes. Yet they are not pretty eyes, not half so clear as mine, though he wears his common clothes with a nameless grace that betrays his true breeding at every step. Yet he is not tall, dark, and melancholy, as my ideal hero would be if I were as great a fool as girls of my age usually are. If I am in love, I have sense enough not to let my love blind my judgment. She did not tell anyone of her new interest in life, strongest in that student community. She had used her power with good nature enough to win the popularity of a school leader, and occasionally with unscrupulousness enough to secure the privilege of a school bully, popularly and privilege, however, only satisfied her when she was in the mood for them. Girls like men want to be petted, pitied, and made much of. When they are different, in low spirits, or in unrequited love, these are services which the weak cannot render to the strong, and which the strong will not render to the weak, except when there is also a difference of sex. Agatha knew by experience that though a weak woman cannot understand why her stronger sister should wish to lean upon her, she may triumph in the fact without understanding it and give chef instead of consolation. Agatha wanted to be understood and not to be shafted. Finding herself unable to satisfy both these conditions, she resolved to do without sympathy and to hold her tongue. She had often had to do so before, and she was helped on this occasion by a sense of the ridiculous appearance her passion might wear in the vulgar eye. Her secret kept itself, as she was supposed in the college to be insensible to the softer emotions. Love brought no external change upon her. It made her believe that she had left her girlhood behind her and was now a woman with a newly developed herd capacity at which she would childishly have scoffed a little while before. She felt ashamed of the bee on the window pane, although it somehow buzzed as frequently as before in spite of her. Her calendar, formerly a monotonous cycle of class time, meal time, playtime, and bedtime, was now irregularly divided by walks past the chalet and accidental glimpses of its tenant. Early in December came a black frost, and navigation on the canal was suspended. Wickens' boy was sent to the college with the news that Wickens' pond would bear, and that the young ladies should be welcome at any time. The pond was only 4 feet deep, and as Miss Wilson set much store by the physical education of her pupils, leaving was given for skating. Agatha, who was expert on the ice, immediately proposed that a select party should go out before breakfast next morning. Actions not in themselves virtuous often appear so when performed at hours that Campbell early racing, and some of the candidates for the Cambridge local, who would not have sacrificed the afternoon to amusement, at once fell in with her suggestion. but for them it might never have been carried out. For when they summoned Agatha at 6:30 next morning to leave her warm bed and brave the biting air, she would have refused without hesitation had she not been shamed into compliance by these laborious ones who stood by her beside, blue-nosed and angry, but ready for the ice. When she had dressed herself with much shuddering and chattering, they allowed their internal discomfort by a slender meal of biscuit, got their skates, and went out across the rimy meadows, past patient cows, breathing clouds of steam, to Wiccan's Pond. Here, to their surprise, was Smilash on electroplated Akim skates, practicing complicated figures with intense diligence. It soon appeared that his skill came short of his ambition, for after several narrow escapes and some frantic staggering, his calves, elbows and occiput smote the ice almost simultaneously. On raising ruefully to a sitting posture, he became aware that 8 young ladies were watching his proceedings with interest. This comes for a common man putting himself above his station by getting into gentlemen's skates, he said. Had I been content with a humble slide, as my father was, I should have been a happier man at the present moment. He sighed, rose, touched his hat to Miss Ward, and took off his skates, adding, "Good morning, Miss Wilson sent me what to be here sharp at 6 to put on the young lady's skates, and I took the liberty of trying a figure or two to keep out the cold. Miss Wilson did not tell me that she ordered you to come," said Miss Ward. Just like her to be thoughtful and yet not let on to be. She is a kind lady and a cleaned like yourself, miss. Sit yourself down on the camp stool and give me your heel, if I may be so bold as to stick a gimlet into it. His assistance was welcome, and Miss Ward allowed him to put on her skates. She was a Canadian and could skate well. Jane, the first to follow her, was anxious as to the strength of the ice, but when reassured, she acquitted herself admirably, for she was proficient in outdoor exercise, and had the satisfaction of laughing in the field at those who laughed at her in the study. Agatha, contrary to her custom, gave way to her companions, and her boots were the last upon which Smilash operated. "How do you do, Miss Whaley?" he said, dropping the Smilash manner now that the rest were out of earshot. "I am very well, thank you," said Agatha, shy and constrained, this phase of her being new to him. He paused with her heel in his hand and looked up at her curiously. She collected herself, returned his gaze steadily, and said, "How did Miss Wilson send you word to come?" "She only knew of our party at 9:30 last night. Miss Wilson did not send for me." "But you have just told Miss Ward that she did." "Yes, I find it necessary. I tell almost as many lies now that I am a simple laborer as I did when I was a gentleman, more in fact. I shall know how much to believe of what you say in the future. The truth is this: I am perhaps the worst skater in the world, and therefore According to a natural law, I convert the faintest distinction on the eyes more than immortal fame for the things in which nature has given me aptitude to excel. I envy that large friend of yours. Jane is her name, I think, more than I envy Plato. I came down here this morning thinking that the skating world has all a bed to practice in secret. I am glad we caught you at it, said Agatha maliciously, for he was disappointing her. She wanted him to be heroic in his conversation, and he would not. I suppose so, he replied. I have observed that woman's dearest delight is to wound men's self-conceit, though men's dearest delight is to gratify hers. There is at least one creature lower than man. Now off with you. Shall I hold you until your ankles get firm? Thank you, she said, disgusted. I can skate pretty well, and I don't think you could give me any useful assistance. And she went off cautiously, feeling that a mishap would be very disgraceful after such a speech. He stood on the shore, listening to the grinding, swaying sound of the skates and watching the growing complexity of the curves they were engraving on the ice. As the girls grew warm and accustomed to the exercise, they laughed, jested, screamed recklessly when they came into collision and sailed before the wind down the whole length of the pond at a perilous speed. The more animated they became, the gloomier looked Smilash. Not to pen oath of choice between them and a parcel of puppies, he said, except that some of them are conscious that there is a man looking at them, although he is only a blackguard laborer. They reminded me of Henrietta in 100 ways. Would I laugh now if the whole sheet of ice were to burst into little bit under them? Just then the ice cracked with a startling report, and the skaters except Jane skimmed away in all directions. You are breaking the ice to pieces, Jane, said Agatha, calling from a safe distance. How can you expect it to bear your weight? Pack of fools, reported Jane indignantly. The noise only shows how strong it is. The shock which the report had given Smilash answered him his question. Make a note that wishes for the destruction of the human race, however rational and sincere, are contrary to nature, he said, recovering his spirits. Besides, what a precious fool I should be if I were working at an international association of creatures only fit for destruction. Hi lady, one word, miss. This was a Miss Ward who had skated into his neighborhood. It being a cold morning and me having a poor and common circulation, would it be looked on as a liberty if I was to cut a slide here or take a turn into the corner all to myself? You may skate over there if you wish, she said after a pause for consideration, pointing to a deserted spot at the leeward end of the pond, where the ice was too rough for comfortable skating. Nobly spoke, he cried with a grin, hurrying to the place indicated where skating being out of the question, he made a pair of slides and gravely exercised himself upon them until his face glowed and his fingers tingled in the frosty air. The time passed quickly when Miss Ward sent for him to take off her skates. There was a general groan and a declaration that it could not possibly be 8:30 yet. Smilash knelt before the camp stool and was presently busy unbuckling and unscrewing. When Jane's turn came, the camp stool creaked beneath her weight. Agatha again remonstrated with her, but immediately reproached herself with flippancy before Smilash, to whom she wished to convey an impression of deep seriousness of character. Smilash, foot of the lot, he said critically, holding Jane's foot between his finger and thumb, as if it were an art treasure which had been invited to examine, and belonging to the finest built lady. Jane snatched away her foot, blushed and said, "Indeed, what next, I wonder?" "Other end next," he said, setting to work on the remaining skate. When it was off, he looked up at her, and she darted a glance at him as she rose, which showed that his compliment, her feet were in fact small and pretty, was appreciated. "Allow me, miss," he said to Gertrude, who was standing on one leg, leaning on Agatha, and taking off her own skates. "No, thank you," she said coldly. "I don't need your assistance. I am well aware that the offer was overbold," he replied with a self-complacency that made his profession of humility exasperating. "If all the skates is off, I will, by Miss Wilson's order, carry them and the camp stool back to the college." Miss Ward handed him her skates and turned away. Gertrude placed hers on the stool and went with Miss Ward. The rest followed, leaving him to stare at the heap of skates and consider how he should carry them. He could think of no better plan than to interlace the strap and hang them in a chain over his shoulder. By the time he had done this, the young ladies were out of sight, and his intention of enjoying their society during the return to the college was defeated. They had entered the building long before he came in sight of it. Somewhat out of conceit with his folly, he went to the servants' entrance and rang the bell there. When the door was opened, he saw Miss Ward standing behind the maid who admitted him. "Oh," she said, looking at the string of skates as if she had hardly expected to see them again. "So you have brought our things back?" "Such were my instructions," he said, taken aback by her manner. "You had no instructions. What do you mean by getting our skates into your charge under false pretense?" "I was about to send the police to take them from you." "How dare you tell me that you were sent to wait on me, when you knew very well that you were nothing of the sort?" "I couldn't help it, miss," he replied submissively. "I am a natural born liar. Always was. I know that it must appear dreadful to you that never told a lie, and don't hardly know what a lie is, belonging as you to do a class where none is ever told. But common people like me tells lies just as a duck sings. I ask your pardon, miss, most humble, and I hope the young ladies will be able to tell one set of skates from the other, for I am blessed if I can. Put them down. Miss Wilson wished to speak to you before you go. Susan, show him the way. Hope you ain't been and got a poor cove into trouble, miss." Miss Wilson knows how you have behaved. He smiled at her benevolently and followed Susan upstairs. On their way, they met Jane, who stole a glance at him and was about to pass by. When he said, "Won't you say a word to Miss Wilson for a poor common fellow, haunted young lady? I have got into dreadful trouble for having made bold to assist you this morning." "You needn't give yourself the pains to talk like that," replied Jane in an ambiguous whisper. "We all knew that you are only pretending." "Well, you can guess my motive," he whispered, looking tenderly at her. "Such stuff and nonsense. I never heard of such a thing in my life," said Jane, and ran away, plainly understanding that he had disguised himself in order to obtain admission to the college and enjoy the happiness of looking at her. "Cursed fool that I am," he said to himself. "I cannot act like a rational creature for 5 consecutive minutes." The servant led him to the study and announced, "The man, if you please, ma'am. Jeff Smilash," he added in explanation. "Come in," said Miss Wilson sternly. He went in and met the determined frown which she cast on him from her seat behind the writing table by saying courteously, "Good morning, Miss Wilson." She bent forward involuntarily, as if to receive a gentleman. Then she checked herself and looked implacable. "I have to apologize," he said, "for making use of your name unwarrantably this morning. Telling a lie. In fact, I happened to be skating when the young ladies came down, and as they needed some assistance which they would hardly have accepted from a common man. Excuse my borrowing that tiresome expression from our acquaintance Smilash. I set their minds at ease by saying that you had sent for me. Otherwise, as you have given me a bad character, though not worse than I deserve, they would probably have refused to employ me, or at least I should have been compelled to accept payment, which I, of course, do not need." Miss Wilson affected surprise. "I do not understand you," she said. "Not altogether," he said, smiling. "But you understand that I am what is called a gentleman." "No, the gentlemen with whom I am conversant do not dress as you dress, nor speak as you speak, nor act you act." He looked at her, and her countenance confirmed the hostility of her tone. He instantly relapsed into an aggravated face of Smilash. "I will no longer attempt to set myself up as a gentleman," he said. "I am a common man, and your ladyship's I recognize me as such and is not to be deceived. But don't go for to say that I am not candid, when I am as candid as ever you will let me be. What fault, if any, do you find with my putting the skates on the young ladies and carrying the camp stool for them?" "If you are a gentleman," said Miss Wilson, reddening, "your conduct in persisting in these antics in my presence is insulting to me, extremely so." "Miss Wilson," he replied, unruffled, "if you insist on Smilash, you shall have Smilash. I take an insane pleasure in personating him. If you want Sydney, my real Christian name, you can command him. But allow me to say that you must have either none or the other. If you become frank with me, I will understand that you are addressing Sydney, if distant and severe. Smilash. No matter what your name may be, said Miss Wilson, much annoyed. I forbid you to come here to or hold any communication whatever with the young ladies in my charge. Why? Because I choose. There is much force in that reason, Miss Wilson, but it is not moral force in the same conveyed by your college prospectus, which I have read with great interest. Miss Wilson, since her quarrel with Agatha, had been sore on the subject of moral force. No one is admitted here, she said, without a trustworthy introduction or recommendation. A disguise is not a satisfactory substitute for either. Disguises are generally assumed for the purpose of concealing crime, he remarked sententiously. Precisely so, she said emphatically. Therefore, I bear, to say the least, a doubtful character. Nevertheless, I have formed with some of the students here a slight acquaintance, of which I seems you disapprove. You have given me no good reason why I should discontinue that acquaintances, and you cannot control me except by your wish. A sort of influence not usually effective with doubtful characters. Suppose I disregarded your wish and that one or two of your pupils come to you and say, Miss Wilson, in our opinion, Smilash is an excellent fellow. We find his conversation most improving. As it is your principle to allow us to exercise our own judgment, we intend to cultivate the acquaintances of Smilash. How will you act in that case? Send them home to their parents at once. I see that your principles are those of the Church of England. You allow the students the right of private judgment on condition that they arrive at the same conclusions as you. Excuse my saying that the principles of the Church of England, however excellent, are not those your prospectus led me to hope for. Your plan is coercion, stark and simple. I do not admit it, said Miss Wilson, ready to argue, even with Smilash, in defense of her system. The girls are quite at liberty to act as they please, but I reserve my equal liberty to exclude them from my college if I do not approve of their behavior. Just so, in most school children are perfectly at liberty to learn their lessons or not, just as they please, but the principal reserves an equal liberty to whip them if they cannot repeat their task. I do not whip my pupils, said Miss Wilson indignantly. The comparison is an outrage. But you expel them, and they are devoted to you and to the place. Expulsion is a dreaded punishment. Yours is the old system of making laws and enforcing them by penalties, and the superiority of Alton College to other college is due not to any difference of system, but to the comparative reasonableness of its law and the mildness and judgment with which they are enforced. My system is radically different from the old one. However, I will not discuss the matter with you. I mind occupied with the prejudices of the old coercive despotism, can naturally only see in the new a modification of the old, instead of, as my system is, an entire reversal or abandonment of it. He shook his head sadly and said, "You seek to impose your ideas on others, ostracizing those who reject them. Believe me, mankind has been doing nothing else ever since it began to pay some attention to ideas. It has been said that a benevolent despotism is the best possible form of government. I do not believe that saying, because I believe another one to the effect that hell is paved with benevolence, which most people, the proverb being too deep for them, misinterpret as unfulfilled intentions, as if a benevolent despot might not by any error of judgment destroy his kingdom, and then say, like Romeo, when he got his friend killed, I thought all for the best. Excuse my rambling. I meant to say, in short, that though you are benevolent and judicious, you are nonetheless a despot." Miss Wilson, at a loss for a reply, regretted that she had not, before letting him gain so far on her, dismissed him summarily instead of tolerating a discussion which she did not know how to end with dignity. He relieved her by adding unexpectedly, "Your system was the cause of my absurd marriage. My wife acquired a degree of culture and reasonableness from her training here, which made her seem a superior being among the charters who form the female seasoning in ordinary society. I admired her dark eyes and was only too glad to seize the excuse her education offered me for believing her a match for me in mind as well as in body." Miss Wilson, astonished, determined to tell him coldly that her time was valuable, but curiosity took possession of her in the act of utterance, and the words that came were, "Who was she?" "Henrietta Jansinus. She is Henrietta Trefusis, and I am Sidney Trefusis. At your mercy. I see I have aroused your compassion at last." "Nonsense," said Miss Wilson hastily, for her surprise was indeed tinged by a feeling that he was thrown away on Henrietta. "I ran away from her and adopted this retreat and this disguise in order to avoid her. The usual rebuke to human forethought followed. I ran straight into her arms, or rather she ran into mine. You remember the scene and were probably puzzled by it. You seem to think your marriage contract a very light matter, Mr. Trefusis. May I ask whose fault was the separation, hers or hers?" "I have nothing to reproach her with. I expected to find her temper hasty, but it was not so. Her behavior was unexpectable, so was mine. Our bliss was perfect, but unfortunately I was not made for domestic bliss. At all events, I could not endure it, so I fled, and when she caught me again I could give no excuse for my flight, though I made it clear to her that I would not resume our connubial relations just yet. We parted on bad terms. I fully intended to write her a sweet letter to make her forgive me in spite of herself, but somehow the weeks have slipped away and I am still fully intending. She has never returned, and I have never returned. This is a pretty state of things, isn't it, Miss Wilson? After all her advantages under the influence of moral force and the movement for the higher education of women, by your own admission, the fault seems to lie upon your moral training and not upon hers. The fault was in the condition of our association. Why they should have attracted me by strongly at first and repelled me so horribly afterwards is one of those devil's riddles which will not be answered until we shall have traced all the yet unsuspected reactions of our inveterate dishonesty. But I am wasting your time. I fear you sent for Smilash, and I have responded by practically annihilating him in public. However, you must still bear with his antics. One moment more, I had forgotten to ask you whether you are interested in the shepherd whose wife you sheltered on the night of the storm. He assured me before he took his wife away that he was comfortably settled in the lodging in Levern. Yes, very comfortably settled indeed. For half a crown a week he obtained permission to share a spacious drawing room with 2 other families in a 10-roomed house in not much better repair than his blown down hovel. This house yielded to its landlord over 200 a year, or rather more than the rent of a commodious mansion in South Kensington. It is a troublesome rent to collect, but on the other hand, there is no expenditure for repairs or sanitation, which are not considered necessary in tenement houses. Our friend has to walk 3 miles to his work and 3 miles back. Exercise is a capital thing for a student or a city clerk, but to a shepherd who has been in the field all day, a long walk at the end of his work is somewhat too much of a good thing. He begged for an increase of wages to compensate him for the loss of the hut, but Sir John pointed out to him that if he was not satisfied, his place could be easily filled by less exorbitant shepherds. Sir John even condescended to explain that the laws of political economy bind employers to buy labor in the cheapest market, and our poor friend, just as ignorant of economics as Sir John, of course did not know that this was untrue. However, as labor is actually so purchased everywhere except in Downing Street and a few other privileged spots, I suggested that our friend should go to some place where his market price would be higher than in merry England. He was willing enough to do so, but unable from want of means. So I lent him a trifle, and now he is on his way to Australia. Workmen are the geese. They lay the golden eggs, but they fly away sometimes. I hear a gong sounding to remind me of fighting of time, the value of your share of it. Good morning. Miss Wilson was suddenly moved not to let him go without an appeal to his better nature. Mr. Trefusis, she said, excuse me, but are you not, in your generosity to others, a little forgetful of your duty to yourself and the first and hardest of all duties? He exclaimed. I beg your pardon for interrupting you. It was only to plead guilty. I cannot admit that it is the first of all duties, but it is sometimes perhaps the hardest, as you say. Still, you could surely do yourself more justice without any great effort. If you wish to live humbly, you can do so without pretending to be an uneducated man and without taking an irritating and absurd name. Why on earth do you call yourself Smilash? I confess that the name has been a failure. I took great pains in constructing it to secure a pleasant impression. It is not a mere invention, but a compound of the words smile and eyelash. A smile suggests good humor. Eyelashes often the expression and are the only features that never blemish a face. Hence, smilash is a sound that should cheer and propitiate. Yet it exasperates. It is really very odd that it should have that effect, unless it is that it raises expectations which I am unable to satisfy. Miss Wilson looked at him doubtfully. He remained perfectly grave. There was a pause. Then, as if she had made up her mind to be offended, she said, "Good morning," shortly. "Good morning, Miss Wilson." The son of the millionaire, like the son of a king, is seldom free from mental disease. I am just mad enough to be a mountebank. If I were a little madder, I should perhaps really believe myself smilash instead of merely acting him. Whether you ask me to forget myself for a moment or to remember myself for a moment, I reply that I am the son of my father and cannot. With my egotism, my charlatanry, my tongue, and my habit of having my own way, I am fit for no calling but that of savior of mankind, just of the sort they like. After an impressive pause, he turned slowly and left the room. I wonder, he said, as he crossed the landing, whether by judiciously losing my way, I can catch a glimpse of that girl who is like a golden idol downstairs. On his way to the door, he saw Agatha coming towards him, occupied with a book which she was tossing up to the ceiling and catching. Her melancholy expression, habitual in her lonely moment, showed that she was not assuming herself, but giving vent to her restlessness as her gaze travelled upward, following the flight of the volume. It was arrested by Smilash. The book fell to the floor. He picked it up and handed it to her, saying, "And in good time, here is the golden idol." "What?" said Agatha, confused. "I call you the golden idol," he said. "When we are apart, I always imagine your face as a face of gold, with eyes and teeth of bdellium or chalcedony or agate or any wonderful unknown stone of appropriate colors." Agatha, witless and dumb, could only look down desperately. "You think you ought to be angry with me, and you do not know exactly how to make me feel that you are so. Is that it?" "No, quite the contrary. At least, I mean that you are wrong. I am the most commonplace person you can imagine. If you only knew. No matter what I may look, I mean. How do you know that you are commonplace?" "Of course I know," said Agatha, her eyes wandering uneasily. "Of course you do not know. You cannot see yourself as others see you. For instance, you have never thought of yourself as a golden idol. But that is absurd. You are quite mistaken about me." "Perhaps so, I know. However, that your face is not really made of gold, and that it has not the same charm for you that it has for others. For me, I must go," said Agatha suddenly in haste. "When shall we meet again?" "I don't know," she said with a growing sense of alarm. "I really must go. Believe me, your hurry is only imaginary. Do you fancy that you are behaving in a manner quite subdued ardor that affected Agatha strangely. "But first tell me whether it is new to you or not." "It is not an emotion at all. I did not say that it was." "Do not be afraid of it. It is only being alone with a man whom you have bewitched. You would be mistress of the situation if you only know how to manage a lover. It is far easier than managing a horse or skating or playing the piano or half a dozen other feats of which you think nothing. Agatha colored and raised her head. Forgive me, he said, interrupting the action. I am trying to offend you in order to save myself from falling in love with you, and I have not the heart to let myself succeed. On your life, do not listen to me or believe me. I have no right to say these things to you. Some find entered into me. Then I am at your side. You should wear a veil, Agatha. She blushed and stood burning and tingling, her presence of mind gone, and her chief sensation one of the relief to hear, for she did not dare to see that he was departing. Her consciousness was in a delicious confusion with the one definite thought in it that she had won her lover at last. The tone of Trefusis' voice, rich with truth and earnestness, his quick insight and his passionate warning to her not to heed him, convinced her that she had entered into the relation destined to influence her whole life. And yet, she said remorsefully, I cannot love him as he loves me. I am selfish, cold, calculating, worldly, and have doubted until now whether such a thing as love really existed. If I could only lose him recklessly and wholly as he loves me. Smilash was also soliloquizing as he went on his way. Now I have made the poor child, who was so anxious that I should not mistake her for a supernaturally gifted and lovely woman, as happy as an angel, and so is that fine girl whom they call Jane Carpenter. I hope they won't exchange confidences on the subject. Chapter 8. Mrs. Trefusis found her parents so unsympathetic on the subject of her marriage that she left their house shortly after her visit to Laverne and went to reside with a hospitable friend. Unable to remain silent upon the matter constantly in her thoughts, she discussed her husband's flight with this friend and elicited an opinion that the behavior of Trefusis was scandalous and wicked. Henrietta could not bear this and sought shelter with a relative. The same discussion arising, the relative said, Well, Hetty, if I am to speak candidly, I must say that I have known Sidney Trefusis for a long time, and he is the easiest person to get on with I ever met, and you know, dear, that you are very trying sometime. And so, cried Henrietta, bursting into tears, after the infamous way he has treated me, I am to be told that it is all my own fault. She left the house next day, having obtained another invitation from a discreet lady who would not discuss the subject at all. This proved quite intolerable, and Henrietta went to stay with her uncle Daniel Jansinus, a jolly and indulgent man. He opined that things would come right as soon as both parties grew more sensible, and as to which of them was in fault, his verdict was 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Whenever he saw his niece pensive or tearful, he laughed at her and called her a grass widow. Henrietta found that she could endure anything rather than this, declaring that the world was hateful to her. She hired a furnished villa in St. John's Wood, whither she moved in December, but suffering much there from loneliness. She soon wrote a pathetic letter to Agatha, entreating her to spend the approaching Christmas vacation with her, and promising her every luxury and amusement that boundless affection could suggest and boundless means procure. Agatha's reply containing some unlooked for information. Alton College, Levern, 14th December. Dearest Hitty, I don't think I can do exactly what you want, as I must spend Christmas with Mamma at Chiswick. But I need not get there until Christmas Eve, and we break up here on yesterday week, the 20th. So I will go straight to you and bring you with me to Mamma's, where you will spend Christmas much better than mopping in a strange house. It is not quite settled yet about my leaving the college after this term. You must promise not to tell anyone, but I have a new friend here, a lover. Not what I am in love with him, though I think very highly of him. You know I am not a romantic fool, but he is much in love with me, and I wish I could return it as he deserves. The French say that one person turns the cheek and the other kisses it. It has not got quite so far as that with us. Indeed, since he declared what he felt, he has only been able to snatch a few words with me when I have been skating or walking. But there has always been at least one word or look that meant a great deal. And now, who do you think he is? He says he knows you. Can you guess? He says you know all his secret. He says he knows your husband well, that he treated you very badly, and that you are greatly to be pitied. Can you guess now? He says he has kissed you. For shame, Hitty. Have you guessed yet? He was going to tell me something more when we were interrupted, and I have not seen him since except at a distance. He is the man with whom you eloped that day when you gave us all such a fright, Mr. Sidney. I was the first to penetrate his disguise, and that very morning I had taxed him with it, and he had confessed it. He said that he was hiding from a woman who was in love with him, and I should not be surprised if it turned out to be true, for he is wonderfully original. In fact, what makes me like him is that he is by far the cleverest man I have ever met, and yet he thinks nothing of himself. I cannot imagine what he sees in me to care for, though he is evidently ensnared by my charms. I hope he won't find out how silly I am. He called me his golden idol. Henrietta, with a scream of rage, tore the letters across and stamped upon it. When the paroxysm subsided, she picked up the pieces, held them together as accurately as her trembling hand could, and read on. But he is not all honey, and will say the most severe things sometimes if he thinks he ought to. He has made me so ashamed of my ignorance that I am resolved to stay here for another term at least, and study as hard as I can. I have not begun yet, as it is not worth while at the 11th hour of this term. But when I return in January. I will set to work in earnest, so you may see that his influence over me is an entirely good one. I will tell you all about him when we meet, for I have no time to say anything now, as the girls are bothering me to go skating with them. He pretended to be a workman and puts on our skates for us, and Jane Carpenter believes that he is in love with her. Jane is exceedingly kind-hearted, but she has a talent for making herself ridiculous that nothing can suppress. The ice is lovely and the weather jolly. We do not mind the cold in the least. They are threatening to go without me. Goodbye. Ever your affectionate Agatha. Henrietta looked round for something sharp. She grasped a pair of scissors greedily and stabbed the air with them. Then she became conscious of her murderous impulse, and she shuddered at it. But in a moment more her jealousy swept back upon her. She cried, as if suffocating, "I don't care. I should like to kill her." But she did not take up the scissors again. At last she rang the bell violently and asked for a railway guide. On being told that there was not one in the house, she scolded her maid so unreasonably that the girl said partly that if she were to be spoken to like that she should wish to leave when her month was up. This check brought Henrietta to her senses. She went upstairs and put on the first cloak at hand, which was fortunately a heavy fur one. Then she took her bonnet and purse, left the house, hailed a passing hansom, and bade the cabman drive her to St. Pancras. When the night came, the air at Levern was like iron in the intense cold. The trees and the wind seemed ice-bound, as the water was, and silence, stillness, and starlight, frozen hard, brooded over the country. At the chalet, Smilash, indifferent to the price of coals, kept up a roaring fire that glowed through the uncurtained windows and tantalized the chilled wayfarer who did not happen to know, as the herdsman of the neighborhood did, that he was welcome to enter and warm himself without risk of rebuff from the tenant. Smilash was in high spirit. He had become a proficient skater, and frosty weather was now a luxury to him. It braced him and drove away his gloomy fits, whilst his sympathies were kept awake and his indignation maintained at an accelerating pitch by the suffering of the poor, who, unable to afford fires or skating, warmed themselves in such sweltering heat as overcrowding produced in all seasons. It was Smilash's custom to make a hot drink of oatmeal and water for himself at 9:30 each evening, and to go bed at 10. He opened the door to throw out some water that remained in the saucepan from its last cleansing. It froze as it fell upon the soil. He looked at the night and shook himself to throw off an oppressive sensation of being clasped in the icy ribs of the air. For the mercy had descended, below the familiar region of crisp and crackly cold, and marked a temperature at which the numb atmosphere seemed on the point of congealing into black solidity. Nothing was stirring. "By George," he said, "This is one of those nights on which a rich man daren't think." He shut the door, hastened back to his fire, and set to work at his codlee, which he watched and stirred with a solitude that would have amused a professed cook. When it was done, he poured it into a large mug, where it steamed invitingly. He took up some in a spoon and blew upon it to cool it. Tap, 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 hurriedly at the door. "Nice night for a walk," he said, putting down the spoon, then shouting, Come in." The latch rose unsteadily, and Henrietta, with frozen tears on her cheeks and an unintelligible expression of wretchedness and rage, appeared. After an instant of amazement, he sprang to her and clasped her in his arms, and she, against her will and protesting voicelessly, stumbled into his embrace. "You are frozen to death," he exclaimed, carrying her to the fire. "This seal jacket is like a sheet of ice. So is your face kissing it. What is the matter? Why do you struggle so? Let me go," she gasped in a vehement whisper. I hate you, my poor love. You are too cold to hate anyone, even your husband. You must let me take off these atrocious French boots. Your feet must be perfectly dead." By this time, her voice and tears were thawing in the warmth of the chalet and of his carelessness. "You shall not take them off," she said, crying with cold and sorrow. "Let me alone. Don't touch me. I am going away, straight back. I will not speak to you, nor take off my things here, nor touch anything in the house." "No, my darling," he said, putting her into a capacious wooden armchair and busily unbuttoning her boots. "You should do nothing that you don't wish to do. Your feet are like stones." Yes, yes, my dear, I am a wretch, unworthy to live. I know it. Let me alone," she said piteously. "I don't want your attention. I have done with you forever. Come, you must drink some of this nasty stuff. You will need strength to tell your husband all the unpleasant things your soul is charged with. Take just a little." She turned her face away and would not answer. He brought another chair and sat down beside her. "My lost, forlorn, betrayed one, I am," she sobbed. "You don't mean it, but I am. You are also my dearest and best of wives. If you ever loved me, Hetty, do, for my once dear sake, drink this before it gets cold." She pottered, sobbed, and yielded to some gentle force which he used, as a child allows herself to be half persuaded, half compelled, to take psychic. "Do you feel better and more comfortable now?" he said. "No," she replied, angry with herself for feeling both. "Then," he said cheerfully, as if she had uttered a hearty affirmative, "I will put some more coals on the fire, and we shall be as snug as possible. It makes me wildly happy to see you at my fireside, and to know that you are my own wife. I wonder how you can look me in the face and say so," she cried. "I should wonder at myself if I could look at your face and say anything else. Oatmeal is a capital restorative. All your energy is coming back. There, that will make a magnificent brace presently. I never thought you deceitful, Sydney. whatever other fault you might have had. Precisely, my love, I understand your feelings. Murder, burglary, intemperance, or the minor vices you could have borne, but deceit you cannot abide. I will go away, she said despairingly, with a fresh burst of tears. I will not be laughed at and betrayed. I will go barefooted. She rose and attempted to reach the door, but he intercepted her and said, My love, there is something serious the matter. What is it? Don't be angry with me. He brought her back to the chair. She took Agatha's letter from the pocket of her fur cloak and handed it to him with a faint attempt to be tragic. Read that, she said, and never speak to me again. All is over between us. He took it curiously and turned it to look at the signature. Ah, he said, my golden idol has been making mischief. Has she? There, exclaimed Henrietta, you have said it to my face. You have convicted myself out of your own mouth. Wait a moment, my dear, I have not read the letter yet. He rose and walked to and fro through the room, reading, she watching him angrily, confident that she should presently see him change countenance. Suddenly he drooped as if his spine had partly given way, and in this ungraceful attitude he read the remainder of the letter. When he had finished, he threw it on the table, thrust his hand deep in his pocket, and roared with laughter, huddling himself together as if he could concentrate the joke by collecting himself into the smallest possible compass. Henrietta, speechless with indignation, could only look her feelings. At last he came and sat down beside her. And so, he said, on receiving this, you rushed out in the cold and came all the way to Levern. Now it seems to me that you must either love me very much, I don't, I hate you, or else love yourself very much. Oh, and she wept afresh. You are a selfish brute, and you do just as you like without considering anyone else. No one ever thinks of me, and now you won't even take the trouble to deny that shameful letter. Why should I deny it? It is true. Do you not see the irony of all this? I assume myself by paying a few compliment to a schoolgirl for whom I do not care 2 straws more than for any agreeable and possibly clever woman I met. Nevertheless, I occasionally feel a pang of remorse because I think that she may love me seriously, although I am only playing with her. I pity the poor hurt I have wantonly ensnared, and all the time she is pitying me for exactly the same reason. She is conscience-stricken because she is only indulging in the luxury of being adored by far the cleverest man she has ever met, and is as hurtful as I am. That is the basis of the religion of love of which poets are the high priestess. Each worshipper knows that his own love is either a transient passion or a sham copied from his favorite poem, but he believes honestly in the love of others for him. Oh, is it not a silly word, my dear? You had no right to make love to Agatha. You have the right to make love to anyone but me, and I won't bear it. You are angry because Agatha has infringed your monopoly. Always monopoly. Why, you silly girl, do you suppose that I belong to you, body and soul? that I may not be moved except by your affection, or think except of your beauty? You may call me as many names as you please, but you have no right to make love to Agatha. My dearest, I do not recollect calling you any names. I think you said something about a selfish brute. I did not. You called me a silly girl. But, my love, you are, and so you are thoroughly selfish. I don't deny it, but let us return to our subject. What did we begin to quarrel about? I am not quarreling, Sidney. It is you. Well, what did I begin to quarrel about? About Agatha Whaley. Oh, pardon me, Hitty. I certainly did not begin to quarrel about her. I am very fond of her. More so, it appears, than she is of me. One moment, Hitty, before you recommence your reproaches. Why do you dislike my saying pretty things to Agatha? Henrietta hesitated and said, because you have no right to it show how little you care for me. It has nothing to do with you. It only shows how much I care for her. I will not stay here to be insulted, said Hetty, her distress returning. I will go home. Not tonight. There is no train. I will walk. It is too far. I don't care. I will not stay here, though I die of cold by the roadside. My cherished one, I have been annoyed you purposely because you show by your anger at you have not ceased to care for me. I am in the wrong, as I usually am, and it is all my fault. Agatha knows nothing about our marriage. I do not blame you so much, said Henrietta, suffering him to place her hand in his shoulder. But I will never speak to Agatha again. She has behaved shamefully to me, and I will tell her so. No doubt she will opine that it is all your fault, dearest, and that I have behaved admirably. Between you I shall stand exonerated, and now, since it is too cold for walking, since it is late, since it is far to Levern and further to London, I must improvise some accommodation for you here, but there is no help for it. You must stay. Chapter 9. Next day, Smilash obtained from his wife a promise that she would behave towards Agatha as if the letter had given no offense. Henrietta pleaded as movingly as she could for an immediate return to their domestic state. But he put her off with endearing speeches, promised nothing but eternal affection, and sent her back to London by the 12 o'clock express. Then his countenance changed. He walked back to Levern and thence to the chalet, like a man pursued by disgust and remorse. Later in the afternoon, to raise his spirit, he took his skates and went to Wickens Pond, where, it being Saturday, he found the ice crowded with the Alton student and their half-holiday visitors, for whom describing circles with his habitual air of compressed hardihood, stopped and stared with indignant surprise as Smilash lurched past him. Is that man here by your permission? He said to Farmer Wickens, who was walking about as if superintending a harvest. He is here because he likes. I take it, said Wickens stubbornly. He is a neighbor of mine and a friend of mine. Is there any objection to my having a friend on my own pond, seeing that there is high on 2 or 3 ton of other people's friends on it 108. Without as much as a with your leave or a by your leave. Oh no, said Fairholme, somewhat dashed. If you are satisfied, there can be no objection. I am glad on it. I thought there might be. Let me tell you, said Fairholme, nettled, that your landlord would not be pleased to see him here. He sent one of Sir John's best shepherds out of the country, after filling his head with ideas about his station. I heard Sir John speak very warmly about it last Sunday. Mayhap you did, Master Fairholme. I have a lease of this land, and gravely poor stuff it is, and I am no way beholden to Sir John's likings and dislikings. A very good thing too for Sir John that I have a lease, for there ain't men in the country at tuck a present or the farm if it was free to morrow. And what is a more, though that young man do talk foolish things about the rights of farm labourer and such like nonsense. If Sir John was to hear him laying it down concerning and improvement and the way we tenant farmers input upon, perhaps he would speak warmer than ever next Sunday and weekends, with a smile expressive of his sense of having retorted effectively upon the person, nodded and walked away. Just then Agatha, skating hand in hand with Jane Carpenter, heard these words in her ear. I have something very funny to tell you. Don't look around. She recognized the voice of Smilash and obeyed. I am not quite sure that you will enjoy it as it deserves, he added, and darted off again, after casting an eloquent glance at Miss Carpenter. Agatha disengaged herself from her companion, made a circuit, and passed near Smilash, saying, What is it? Smilash flitted away like a swallow, traced several circles around Fairholme, and then returned to Agatha and proceeded side by side with her. I have read the letter you wrote to Hetty, he said. Agatha's face began to glow. She forgot to maintain her balance and almost fell. Take care. And so you are not fond of me, in the romantic sense? No answer. Agatha, dumb and afraid to lift her eyelids. That is fortunate, he continued, because good evening, Miss Ward. I have done nothing but admire your skating for the last hour, because men were deceivers ever, and I am no exception, as you will presently admit. Agatha murmured something, but it was unintelligible amid the din of skating. You think not? Well, perhaps you are right. I have said nothing to you that is not in a measure true. You have always had a peculiar charm for me, but I did not mean you to tell Hetty. Can you guess why? Agatha shook her head. Because she is my wife. Agatha's ankle became limp. With an effort, she kept upright until she reached Jane, to whom she clung for support. Don't scream, Jane. I will upset you. I must sit down, said Agatha. I am tired. Let me lean on you until we get to the chairs. Bosh, I can skate for an hour without sitting down, said Jane. However, she helped Agatha to a chair and left her. Then Smilash, as if desiring a rest also, sat down close by on the margin of the pond. Well, he said, without troubling himself as to whether their conversation attracted attention or not. What do you think of me now? Why did you not tell me before, Mr. refuses. That is the cream of the joke, he replied, poising his heels on the ice, so that his skates stood vertically at legs' length from him, and looking at them with a cynical air. I thought you were in love with me, and that the truth would be too severe a blow to you. Ha ha. And for the same reason, you generously forbore to tell me that you were no more in love with me than with the man in the moon. Each played a face and palmed it off on other as a tragedy. There are some things so unmanly, so unkind, and so cruel, said Agatha, that I cannot understand any gentleman saying them to a girl. Please do not speak to me again, Miss Ward. Come to me for a moment. I am not well. Ward hurried to her side, Smilash, after staring at her for a moment in astonishment and in some concern, skimmed away into the crowd. When he reached the opposite bank, he took off his skates and asked Jane, who strayed intentionally in his direction, to tell Miss Whaley that he was gone, and would skate no more there. Without adding a word of explanation, he left her and made for his dwelling. As he went down into the hollow where the road passed through the plantation of the college side of the chalet, he descried a boy in the uniform of the post office sliding along the frozen ditch. A presentiment of evil tidings came upon him like a darkening of the sky. He quickened his pace. Anything for me, he said. The boy, who knew him, fumbled in a letter case and produced a buff envelope. It contained a telegram from Jansinus, London, to J. Smilash, Laverne. Henrietta dangerously ill after journey, wants to see you. Doctors say must come at once. There was a pause. Then he folded the paper methodically and put it in his pocket, as if quite done with it. And so he said, perhaps the tragedy is to follow the farce after all. He looked at the boy, who retreated, not liking his expression. Did you slide all the way from Laverne? Only to come quicker, said the messenger, faltering. I came as quick as I could. You carried news heavy enough to break the thickest ice ever frozen. I have a mind to throw you over the top of that tree instead of giving you this half-crown. You let me alone, whimpered the boy, retreating another pace. Get back to Laverne as fast as you can run or slide, and tell Mr. Marsh to send me the fastest trap he has to drive me to the railway station. Here is your half-crown. Off with you, and if I do not find the trap ready when I want it, oh, betide you. The boy came for the money mistrustfully and ran off with it as fast as he could. Smilash went into the chalet and never reappeared. Instead, Trefusis, a gentleman in an ulster, carrying a rug, came out, locked the door, and hurried along the road to Laverne, where he was picked up by the trap and carried swiftly to the railway station, just in time to catch the London train. Everything paper, sir, said a voice at the window as he settled himself in the corner of a first-class carriage. No, thank you. Food warmer, sir, said a porter, appearing in the news vendor's place. Ah, that is a good idea. Yes, let me have a food warmer. The food warmer was brought, and Trefusis composed himself comfortably for his journey. It seemed very short to him. He could hardly believe, when the train arrived in London, that he had been nearly 3 hours on the way. There was a sense of Christmas about the travellers and the people who were at the terminus to meet them. The porter who came to the carriage door reminded Trefusis by his manner and voice that the season was one at which it becomes a gentleman to be festive and liberal. What luggage, sir? Handsome or farewell, sir? For a moment, Trefusis felt a vagabond impulse to resume the language of Smilash and fable to the man of hampers of turkey and plum pudding in the van. But he repressed it, got into a hansom and was driven to his father-in-law's house in Belsize Avenue, studying in a gloomily critical mood the anxiety that surged upon him and made his heart beat like a boy's as he drew near his destination. There were 2 carriages at the door. When he alighted, the reticent expression of the coachman sent a tremor through him. The door opened before he rang. "If you please, sir," said the maiden in low voice, "will you step into the library, and the doctor will see you immediately." On the first landing of the staircase, 2 gentlemen were speaking to Mr. Jansinus, who hastily moved out of sight, not before a glimpse of his air of grief, 174, and discomfiture had given Trefusis a strange tic, succeeded by a sensation of having been 20 years a widower. He smiled unconcernedly as he followed the girl into the library and asked her how she did. She murmured some reply and hurried away, thinking that the poor young man would alter his tone presently. He was joined at once by a grey-whiskered gentleman, scrupulously dressed and mannered. Trefusis introduced himself, and the physician looked at him with some interest. Then he said, "You have arrived too late, Mr. Trefusis. All is over, I am sorry to say. Was the long railway journey she took in this cold weather the cause of her death?" Some bitter words that the physician had heard upstairs made him aware that this was a delicate question, but he said quietly, "The proximate cause, doubtless, the proximate cause. She received some unwelcome and quite unlooked for intelligence before she started. Had that anything to do with her death? Do you think it may have produced an unfavorable effect?" said the physician, growing restive and taking up his clothes. The habit of referring such event as much cause is carried too far, as a rule. No doubt I am curious because the event is novel in my experience. I suppose it is a commonplace in yours. Pardon me. 175. The loss of a lady so young and so favorably circumstanced is not a commonplace either in my experience or in my opinion. The physician held up his head as he spoke in protest against any assumption that his sympathies had been blunted by his profession. Did she suffer? For some hours, yes. We were able to do a little to alleviate her pain, poor thing. He almost forgot Trefusis as he added the apostrophe. Hours of pain. Can you conceive any good purpose that those hours may have served? The physician shook his head. leaving it doubtful whether he meant to reply in the negative or to deplore consideration of that nature. He also made a movement to depart, being uneasy in conversation with Trefusis, who would, he felt sure, presently ask a question or make remark with which he could hardly deal without committing himself in some direction. His conscience was not quite at rest. Henrietta's pain had not, he thought, served any good purpose, but he did not want to say so, lest he should acquire a reputation for impiety and lose his practice. He believed that the general practitioner who attended the family and had called him in when the case grew serious had treated Henrietta unskillfully, but professional etiquette bound him so strongly that sooner than betray his colleagues' inefficiency, he would have allowed him to decimate London. One word more, said Trefusis. Did she know that she was dying? No. I considered it best that she should not be informed of her danger. She passed away without any apprehension. Then one can think of it with equanimity. She dreaded death, poor child. The wonder is that there was not enough folly in the household to prevail against your good sense. The physician bowed and took his leave, esteeming himself somewhat fortunate in escaping without being reproached for his humanity in having allowed Henrietta to die unawares. The moment later the general practitioner entered, Trefusis, having accompanied the consulting physician to the door, detected the family doctor in the act of pulling a long face just outside it. Restraining a desire to seize him by the throat, he seated himself on the edge of the table and said cheerfully, "Well, doctor, how has the world used you since we last met?" The doctor was taken aback, but the solemn disposition of his features did not relax as he almost intoned, "Has Sir Francis told you the sad news, Mr. Trefusis?" "Yes." "Frightful, isn't it? Lord bless me. We are here today and gone tomorrow." "True, very true. Sir Francis has a high opinion of you." The doctor looked a little foolish. "Everything was done that could be done, Mr. Trefusis, but Mrs. Jansenus was very anxious that no stone should be left unturned. She was good enough to say that her sole reason for washing me to call in Sir Francis was that you should have no cause to complain." "Indeed, an excellent mother. Yes, sad event for her. Ah, yes, yes, dear me. A very sad event, most disagreeable. Such a cold day too. Pleasanter to be in heaven than here in such weather possible." "Ah," said the doctor, as if much sound comfort lay in that. "I hope so, I hope so. I do not doubt it. Sir Francis did not permit us to tell her, and I, of course, deferred to him. Perhaps it was for the best. You would have told her then, if Sir Francis had not objected. Well, there are, you see, considerations which we must not ignore in our profession. Death is a serious thing, as I am sure I need not remind you, Mr. Trefusis. We have sometimes higher duties than indulgence to the natural feeling of our patients." "Quite so. The possibility of eternal bliss and the probability of eternal torment are consolation not to be lightly withheld from a dying girl. However, what is a past cannot be mended. I have much to be thankful for. After all, I am a young man and shall not cut a bad figure as a widower. And now tell me, doctor, am I not in very bad repute? Upstairs. Mr. refuses. Sir, I cannot meddle in family matters. I understand my duties and never overstep them. The doctor shrugged at last, spoke as loftily as he could. Then I will go and see Mr. Jansinus, said refuses, getting off the table. Stay, sir, one moment. I have not finished. Mrs. Jansinus has asked me to ask. I was about to say that I am not speaking now as the medical advisor of this family, but although an old friend, and Mrs. Jansinus has asked me to ask, to request you to excuse Mr. Jansinus, as he is prostrated by grief and is, as I can, as a medical man, assure you, unable to see anyone. She will speak to you herself as soon as she feels able to do so, at some time this evening. Meanwhile, of course, any orders you may give. You must be fatigued by your journey, and I always recommend people not to fast too long. It produces an acute form of indigestion. Any orders you may wish to give will, of course, we attend to at once. I think, said refuses after a moment's inflection. I will order a hansom. There is no ill feeling, said the doctor, who, as a slow man, was usually alarmed by prompt decisions, even when they seemed wise to him, as this one did. I hope you have not gathered from anything I have said. Not at all. You have displayed the utmost tact, but I think I had better go. Jansinus can bear death and misery with perfect fortitude when it is on a large scale and hidden in a back slum, but when it breaks into his own house and attacks his property. His daughter was his property until very recently. He is just the man to lose his head and quarrel with me for keeping mine. The doctor was unable to cope with his speech, which conveyed vaguely monstrous idea to him. Seeing refuses about to leave, he said in a low voice, will you go upstairs? Upstairs, why? I thought you might wish to see. He did not finish the sentence, but refuses flinched. The blank had expressed what was meant. To see something that was Henrietta, and that is a thing we must cast out and hide with a little superstitious mummying to save appearances. Why did you remind me of it? But sir, whatever your views may be, will you not, as a matter of form, in deference to the feeling of the family, let them spare their feelings for the living? On those behalf, I have often appealed to them in vain, cried refuses, losing patience. Damn their feelings, and turning to the door, he found it open and Mrs. Jansinus there listening. Refuses was confounded. He knew what the effect of this speech must be, and felt that it would be folly to attempt excuse or explanation. He put his hand into his pockets, leaned against the table and looked at her, mutely wondering what would follow on her part. The doctor broke the silence by saying tremulously, I have communicated the melancholy intelligence to Mr. Refuses. I hope you told him also, she said sternly, that however deficient we may be in feeling, we did everything that lay in our power for our child. I am quite satisfied, said Refuses. No doubt you are, with the result, said Mrs. Jansinus badly. I wish to know whether you have anything to complain of. Nothing. Please do not imply that anything has happened through our neglect. What have I complained of? She had a warm room and a luxurious bed to die in, with the best medical advice in the world. Plenty of people are starving and freezing today that we may have the means to die fashionably. Ask them if they have any cause for complaint. Do you think I will prangle over her body about the moment of money spent on her illness? What measures is that of the cause she had for complaint? I never grudged money to her. How could I, seeing that more than I can waste is given to me for nothing? Or how could you? Yet she had great reason to complain for me. You will allow them to be so. It is perfectly true. Well, when I am in humor for it, I will reproach myself and not you. He paused and then turned forcibly on her, saying, Why do you select this time of all others to speak so bitterly to me? I am not aware that I have said anything to call for such a remark. Did you hear me say anything? Mr. Trefusis does not mean to say that you did, I am sure. Oh no, Mr. Trefus's feelings are naturally harrowed, that is all. My feelings, cried Trefusis impatiently. Do you suppose my feelings are a trumpery set of social observances to be harrowed to order and exhibited at funerals? She has gone, as we three shall go soon enough. If we were immortal, we might reasonably pity the dead. As we are not, we had better save our energies to minimize the harm we are likely to do before we follow her. The doctor was deeply offended by this speech, for the statement that he should one day die seemed to him a reflection upon his professional mastery over death. Mrs. Jansinus was glad to see Trefusis confirming her bad opinion and report of him by his conduct and language in the doctor's presence. There was a brief pause, and then Trefusis, too far out of sympathy with them to be able to lead the conversation into a kinder vein, left the room. In the act of putting on his overcoat in the hall, he hesitated and hung it upon again irresolutely. Suddenly he ran upstairs. At the sound of his steps, a woman came from one of the rooms and looked inquiringly at him. Is it here? He said. Yes, sir, she whispered. A painful sense of constriction came in his chest, and he turned pale and stopped with his hand on the lock. Don't be afraid, sir, said the woman with an encouraging smile. She looks beautiful. He looked at her with a strange grin, as if she had uttered a ghastly but irresistible joke. Then he went in, and when he reached the bed, wished he had stayed without. He was not one of those who, seeing little in the faces of the living, miss little in the faces of the dead. The arrangement of the black hair on the pillow, the soft drapery, and the flowers placed there by the nurse to complete the artistic effect to which she had so confidently referred were lost on him. He saw only a lifeless mask that had been his wife's face, and at sight of it his knees failed, and he had to lean for support on the rail at the foot of the bed. When he looked again, the face seemed to have changed. It was no longer a wax-like mask, but Henrietta, girlish and pathetically at rest. Death seemed to have cancelled her marriage and womanhood. He had never seen her look so young. A minute passed, and when a tear dropped on the coverlet, he started, shook another tear on his hand, and stared at it incredulously. "This is a fraud of which I have never even dreamed," he said. "Tears and no sorrow. Here am I crying, growing maudlin. Whilst I am glad that she is gone and I free, I have the mechanism of grief in me somewhere. It begins to turn at sight of her thought. I have no sorrow, just as she used to start the mechanism of passion when I had no love, and thus that made no difference to her. Whilst the wheels went round she was satisfied. I hope the mechanism of grief will flag and stop in its spinning as soon as the other used to. It is stopping already, I think. What a mockery. Whilst it last says, suppose I am really sorry, and yet would I restore her to life? If I could, perhaps so. I am therefore thankful that I cannot." He folded his arms on the rail and gravely addressed the dead figure, which still affected him so strongly that he had to exert his will to face it with composure. "If you really loved me, it is well for you that you are dead. Idiot, that I was to believe that the passion you could inspire, you poor child, would last. We are both lucky. I have escaped from you, and you have escaped from yourself." Presently he breathed more freely and looked round the room to help himself into the matter-of-fact vein by a little unembarrassed action, and the commonplace aspect of the bedroom furniture. He went to the pillow and bent over it, examining the face closely. "Poor child," he said again, tenderly, then with a sudden reaction, apostrophizing himself instead of his wife. "Poor us. Poor idiot. Poor jackanapes. Here is the body of a woman who was nearly as old as myself, and perhaps wiser, and here am I moralizing over it as if I were God Almighty and she was a baby. The more you reminded a man of what he is, the more conceited he becomes. Monstrous. I shall feel immortal presently." He touched the cheek with a faint attempt at roughness. He felt how cold it was. Then he touched his own and remarked, "This is what I am hastening toward at the express speech of 60 minutes an hour." He stood, looked down at the face, and testing this sombre reflection for a long time. When it palled on him, he roused himself and exclaimed more cheerfully, "After all, she is not dead. Every word she uttered, every idea she formed and expressed, was an inexhaustible and indestructible impulse." He paused, considered a little further, and relapsed into gloom, adding, "And the dozen others whose names will be with hers in the time tomorrow. Their words too are still in the air, to endure there to all eternity." How the air must be crammed with nonsense. Two sounds sometimes produce a silence. Perhaps ideas neutralize one another in some analog way. No, my dear, you are dead and gone and done with. And I shall be dead and gone and done with too soon to leave me leisure to fool myself with the hope of immortality. Poor Hitty. Well, goodbye, my darling. Let us Pretend for a moment that you can hear that. I know it will please you." All this was in a half-articulate whisper. When he ceased, he still bent over the body, gazing intently at it. Even when he had exhausted the subject and turned to go, he changed his mind and looked again for a while. Then he stood erect, apparently nerved and refreshed, and left the room with a firm step. The woman was waiting outside, seeing that he was less distressed than when he entered. She said, "I hope you are satisfied, sir." Delighted, charmed. The arrangements are extremely pretty and tasteful, most consolatory, and he gave her half a sovereign. "I thank you, sir," she said, dropping a courtesy. The poor young lady, she was anxious to see you, sir, to hear her say that you were the only one that cared for her, and so fretful with her mother too. Let him be told that I am dangerously ill, says she, and he will come." She didn't know how true her word was, poor thing, and she went off without being aware of it, flattering herself and flattering me. Happy girl. Bless you, I know what her feelings were, sir. I have had experience. Here she approached him confidentially and whispered, "The family were again you, sir, and she knew it, but she wouldn't listen to them. She thought of nothing when she was easy enough to think at all, but of your coming, and here is the old gentleman." Trefusis looked round and saw Mr. Jansenus, whose handsome face was white and seamed with grief and annoyance. He drew back from the proffered hand of his son-in-law, like an over-worried child from an ill-timed attempt to pet it. Trefusis pitied him. The nurse coughed and retired. "Have you been speaking to Mr. Jansenus?" said Trefusis. "Yes," said Jansenus offensively. "So have I, unfortunately. Pray make my apologies to her. I was rude. The circumstances upset me." "You are not upset, sir," said Jansenus loudly. "You do not care a damn." Trefusis recoiled. "You damned my feelings, and I will damn yours," continued Jansenus in the same tone. Trefusis involuntarily looked at the door through which he had lately passed. Then, recovering himself, he said quietly, "It does not matter. She can't hear us." Before Jansenus could reply, his wife hurried upstairs, caught him by the arm and said, "Don't speak to him, John, and you," she added to Trefusis. "Will you be gone?" "What?" he said, looking cynically at her. "Without my debt, without my property. Well, be it so. What do you know of the feeling of the respectable man?" persisted Jansenus, breaking out again in spite of his wife. "Nothing is scared to you. This shows what socialists are, and what fathers are, and what mothers are," retorted Trefusis, giving way to his temper. "I thought you loved Hetty, but I see that you only love your feelings and your responsibility. The devil take both." She was right. My love for her, incomplete as it was greater than yours, and he left the house in dudgeon. But he stood away in the avenue to laugh at himself and his father-in-law. Then he took a hansom and was driven to the house of his solicitor, whom he wished to consult on the settlement of his late wife's affairs.